Hello and welcome. The BBC's political editor is here after his usual marathon tour of party conferences to address criticism of many listeners that Reform UK has been getting a disproportionate amount of attention on the airwaves. Here the latest nomination for Feedback's Interview of the Year, and rock legend Ronnie Wood has caused outrage, not for trashing a hotel room, but for being allowed more than one luxury item on Desert Island Discs. Now, Chris Mason, political editor at the BBC, has had a busy 6 weeks doing the rounds of the main party conferences.
Thank you, conference. As he lies, as he divides, the BBC and others give Farage so much time and attention, but they never hold him to account for all the damage he has already done.
And the question I ask seriously of Nigel Farage and Reform is, do they love our country? Do they want to serve our country, all of it, our beautiful, tolerant, diverse country?
You might as well stay on your feet, because I'm going to say, we'll say it loud, we'll say it clear, migrants and refugees are welcome here!
Keir Starmer promised to be a left-wing Labour leader, and then he became a right-wing Prime Minister. He stole Jeremy Corbyn's clothes, and now he's dressing up as Nigel Farage.
Well, I'll be talking to Chris in just a moment about how unusual Britain's current political landscape is, and he'll be tackling your many comments about the amount of time Reform UK and its leader, Nigel Farage, have been getting on the BBC.
My name is Andrew Blewett. I live in Exeter in Devon. I was unsurprised to hear that Reform UK and Mr Farage have had a vastly disproportionate and frequently uncritical amount of news coverage from the BBC. I understand that the defence is that, for example, whereas the Liberal Democrats have 20 times more elected MPs, Reform UK is ahead in opinion polls. Since when do we determine news policy by opinion polls? My concern is that this is a result of senior managers in the BBC fearing for their future if a hard right-wing government comes to pass.
This is Sheila Freeman from South London. Why does the BBC give so little attention to the views of the Green Party or to the broader environmental movement? All we get is back and forth between Labour, Conservative and Nigel Farage. You are cutting out a huge swathe of opinion in this country, and the more time you give to Nigel Farage, the more acceptable his views become, because people don't hear the alternatives.
Well, I'm joined now by the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, thank you so much in a really busy conference season for finding time for feedback.
Thanks for having me.
Chris, the conference season is sort of set coverage for the BBC every year, and you might assume some, when there's no looming general election, will be quieter than others, but we've had a lot of listener comment about this one, so I just want to get right to the nub of it. Here's Dorothy Macedo from Worthing.
I'm utterly disgusted that the BBC is once again acting as Farage's personal mouthpiece. Nobody would guess his party only has 5 MPs from the prominence the BBC gives him. You don't give other parties with as many or even more MPs the same prominence. Why not?
I understand Dorothy's point, and I understand the point made by other listeners who will articulate a similar view. What we have to do is reflect politics as it is now, both in numbers, and that's not just numbers of MPs. There is also the share of the vote, the scale of the popular vote. It's worth saying that back at the general election, Reform UK amounted a greater number of voters than the Liberal Democrats did, but also, crucially, what has happened since, both in electoral performance and in opinion polls. They are and have always been part of the metric that judges how we go about covering different parties. The other thing that is worth emphasising, so I have just emerged from Planet Party Conference over the last 6 weeks, and Nigel Farage did not have to pay for a hotel room in Bournemouth, Liverpool, Manchester, Swansea or Aberdeen, 5 of the spots of 5 of the rival conferences to Reform, in order to be a frequent occupier of the minds of the parties that were meeting there. He at the moment, whether you like him or loathe him, and people tend to have strong views about him, he at the moment is making the political weather. And it is part of my job to reflect that and to scrutinise that.
So what you're saying is that if we are listening to Keir Starmer, but actually he's talking about Nigel Farage, that kind of goes down in your book as, OK, well, look, I'm covering the Labour Party conference. It's kind of not my fault if they're talking about Nigel Farage.
What has happened in the last 12 months, Andrea, is a change in our politics that we haven't seen in decades. And it is something that I and the team I'm a part of are working our way through every day. How do we calibrate this new politics where you have an insurgent party with a very small number of MPs, but is that performing consistently in the opinion polls ahead of everyone else, has also got the beginnings of an electoral track record, the by-election and the local elections in England of a couple of months ago, and indeed local authority by-elections since then, that suggests there is something in that opinion poll performance. We have to reflect that, but it is new and uncharted territory that we are feeling our way through.
It's really interesting that you say that, actually, Chris, because, we know that you are an extremely experienced political journalist. You've been around a long time. You've been covering this for the BBC for a long time. I just want you to give us a sense of how different this is. I mean, since Brexit, it sometimes seems like we've had seismic events happening about every 20 minutes. Can you just put this in context for us?
The context in terms of the smorgasbord of party politics, I think, is something we have just not seen in recent decades. Yes, there was all of the tumult associated with the independence referendum in Scotland, with the Brexit referendum around the UK, which was also unprecedented in its own way. But those things were principally, or for one reason they were unprecedented, was because they were separate from or detached from the normal loyalties around party politics. What we're seeing now is as I say, this sort of smorgasbord of political support. You see it at a UK level, you see it at a nations level within the nations of the UK as well, which is an added level of complexity. And it means that we're having to make judgments, editorial judgments day to day, that didn't really apply until fairly recently. So to give you an example, on an ordinary day, for a political journalist like me, covering an ordinary news story, up until about a year ago, the broad formula would be the government announces something and the principal party of opposition offers their response. And then sometimes, for editorial reasons, you might hear from a more minor party because they had something distinctive to say, or whatever the reason might be. But the usual formula would be government says something, main opposition party reacts. Or maybe main opposition party says something and government party reacts. Right now, that formula doesn't work. And why does it not work? It doesn't work because if you look again at the trends in opinion polls, and indeed you look at the performance of the traditionally two big parties at Westminster at the last general election, right now their combined share of support is roughly 40%, sometimes less than that. In recent years, it has been as high as 80. So if I just put Labour and the Conservatives in a piece, 6 out of 10 viewers are saying, well, I don't really like either of them. Where's the voice that I'm currently supporting? Equally, if I put everyone in, my editor will say, blimey, there was a whole load of politicians in that piece, and we've got loads of other news to do, Chris. Can you not trim it down a bit? That's the daily dilemma.
But what some of our listeners are concerned about is that controversial policies can dominate news coverage. Barbara Dowling, for example, from Tyne and Wear, makes this point.
Much as I enjoy a lot of the programmes on the BBC, it is my opinion that there is far too much coverage of Nigel Farage, the Reform Party and immigration issues. I feel that the BBC has become a mouthpiece for reform and is constantly adding fuel to the fire of immigration and our borders. Nigel Farage has led the British people to believe that this is the issue which is of most concern to them, and the media has taken this up. The media is a powerful tool, and you have a responsibility not to skew the minds of your listeners.
Views of every level of controversy deserve scrutiny, and scrutiny takes time. So I sort of take issue with the arguments around words like coverage. Let me give you an example, a really good example. A couple of weeks ago, during the Liberal Democrat conference, the Liberal Democrats have taken a public position of questioning the BBC around its coverage of reform. During that conference, the Reform Party unveiled its new policy about indefinite leave to remain. It was a distinctive policy. It was something very different from what we've seen either from them or indeed from any other UK political party. That was a policy that deserved scrutiny, as they all do, but it particularly did given how different it was, how distinctive it was. There's a trade-off there. Some people will have heard that and thought, this is yet more coverage of reform. But to do that in a limited time span, not to give much attention to that, would be to inadequately scrutinise it. In other words, if you increase scrutiny, you tend to increase coverage. And a lot of people will have a view that there should be good scrutiny, but might also have a view that there is, as they would see it, too much coverage. So I'm sceptical about using a sort of measure of coverage or that word coverage as being sort of wildly useful in this conversation. The other thing I think is worth mentioning here, and we saw an element of this during the Brexit years, is that Nigel Farage divides opinion. Political leaders tend to, but he does in particular. And so there will always be a sizable chunk of people who have incredibly strong negative views about Nigel Farage, and that is entirely their prerogative, and you will hear those views articulated on our programmes frequently from those in public life who hold that view too. It is not our job to have a view about those views. We provide, hopefully, a civilised town square in which the full range of political opinion can be debated, underpinned by a reverence for facts, and other people will have a view as to whether or not they like the individuals in question. We simply could not walk past, and should not walk past, a current trend, and who knows where the trends go in the future, because politics is incredibly volatile, but a current trend that points to a sustained amount of support and interest in the policies of an outlook of Reform UK.
Chris, you've talked about the fact that trends and polls are showing that Reform has got more support, a lot more support than the seats it has in Parliament. Janet Potter makes the point.
Please, can you stop adding to the growing lack of any compassion to refugees by giving Farage and his 3 other MPs so much airtime? You introduced the main headlines on the World at One today by saying that you're aware that the Reform Party has more coverage than their size warrants, but continued with the article because of the increase of those sympathetic to Reform's views. You seem to be unaware that this overexposure is a contributing factor.
What Janet's getting at there is that giving Reform this coverage may in fact be contributing to its success in the polls. This is something that other listeners have expressed as well, and I wonder if you've got an opinion on it.
I think it's for other people to come to a conclusion as to whether or not they like a political party or not. It is my job to provide scrutiny of and analysis of those who are making the political weather, both those who are in government and those who aspire to be in government, and to put it into context and to offer comparisons with the past. I've covered Nigel Farage and his various political vehicles for north of 20 years, and what I'm seeing now is something I have not seen in him or his parties before. Now, some people won't like to hear that because they'll have a very, very strong view about their own fears of Nigel Farage potentially being Prime Minister one day. And of course, that's their prerogative to have that fear.
Chris, I think it's quite telling that here at Feedback, we have received a lot of comments about this, and you've addressed some of them today. We haven't received any from Reform UK supporters. And I wonder, does that tell you that they might be going elsewhere for coverage? I mean, I don't know that, but we haven't received any from Reform supporters. I wonder if that's something that concerns you at the BBC?
It could also mean that people who are inclined to support Reform don't have a strong view about what I would argue is a perfectly proportionate amount of coverage relative to where they are in the political argument, and would see that as a reasonable and proportionate thing for a public broadcaster to do, which is what I believe is what we are doing.
You will know that BBC bosses' plans to alter the choice of story selection in order to win trust of Reform voters was reported in the press. And I wonder if you've altered your journalism or your story choices at all in order to win the trust of Reform voters.
No, I don't think I have. I think I approach it with a sort of pretty cool head around.
Were you asked to, Chris?
No, I wasn't, and I've never been asked to by any bosses. I hear references from some about, the BBC's only covering Reform because Reform has a particular outlook on the BBC. I mean, that is, to put it gently, complete and utter drivel. I mean, it runs so counter to the journalistic instinct, the instinct of newsrooms. We're here to tell a story. We're outsiders. We're proud to be outsiders. We're proud to be observers. I've never been told how to report things. We have very robust internal conversations about how we're covering stuff, what we're getting right, what we're getting wrong. Do we get everything right? No. Do I get everything right? No. We should be the first to acknowledge that. Of course we don't. We're human beings, but we're constantly striving to revere truth, pursue truth without an agenda, be very alive to how politics is now, not how it might have been 6 months ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, and pursue it with an open mind.
And a few years ago, of course, there weren't other channels like GB News, Talk TV. Are you concerned that you might be losing listeners to them, and does it in any way influence the way that you cover stories?
Makes no difference at all to how I cover stories. A competitive media marketplace is a good thing. I wouldn't have a sort of problem with that at all. I mean, I think the reality of a fracturing media, and that happens within the BBC, let alone beyond it, is that I have to speak to far more outlets to reach the same audience that Robin Oakley might have done 30 years ago as BBC political editor. But I love that because I love broadcasting. I love trying to explain stories. And actually, the joy of a multiplicity of outlets is that I can be hopefully more savvy on any particular outlet about what the audience for that outlet actually wants and how they would like politics to be communicated. So yeah, of course I will, how you tell a story on 5 Live, Radio 2, Radio 4, Newscast, the 10 o'clock news, Breakfast TV, it's Scottcast, you name it. It varies in the same way that our register and language and vocabulary varies depending on the social company that we're keeping in our day-to-day lives. I love that. I sort of love that and revere that. And in many senses, this fracturing of media can bring you closer to the audiences that consume that particular outlet. So, I mean, when I'm stopped in the street about the work I do, which happens every day and is wonderful because it sort of reminds me that there's people watching, listening and reading, and is almost always positive, which is lovely. quite often, about half the time, people are talking about newscast. And why is that? It's not because half the audience I talk to are listening to newscast. It'll be a much smaller proportion of the audience I talk to. But they feel like they've got almost like a permission to open a conversation, as opposed to that bloke with a dodgy haircut who appears on the telly every night and ought to get some new ties. There's a bit more distance. There's a bit more sort of sense of detachment, perhaps. Whereas newscasters, that's how we describe ourselves and our listeners, I think there's a sort of sense of a level playing field. And I love that.
And it feels more like a community.
Exactly. And I don't think that, I might be wrong, but I don't think that would have existed 30 years ago when perhaps broadcasting was a bit more sort of delivered from on high.
Chris, you've been very generous with your time, but just one last question. When you're reporting for radio and for podcasts, we, the listener, are literally asking you to read the room for us at times. And I know from covering party conferences myself that you can go from one conference to another in just a few days, and you can palpably feel the difference in atmosphere at times. This year, I know there were a number of empty chairs at the Conservative Party conference, but who's there, who's not there, that's sometimes more important than what's been said, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing about I love party conferences. I conclude at the end of 6 weeks of them that you can have too much of a good thing, but I do love them. And the reason I love them, Andrea, is exactly that point, that the key thing I take away from a conference is something that no spin doctor can either magically make appear nor magically make disappear, and it is the mood, it is the vibe of a party. The other thing I get to do at party conferences is meet activists from all the parties. In going to the conferences, and I've been to 6, so not all, but plenty of them this season, this autumn, I get a sense to chat to them in the bars, in the coffee queue, wherever it might be. And that's another element in that constant, never finished jigsaw for someone in my job of trying to get a sense of what people are talking about, what matters, how the political mood might be shifting, how ephemeral that mood might be, or the opposite, the extent to which there might be a solidity building up around it. And that's the nature of my job, every day feeling our way through the kind of political landscape, and then throughout that day doing our best to try and reflect that to our audiences openly, truthfully, and with a sense of judgment about proportion. And as I say, particularly in this climate right now, this new landscape, that is a learning curve each and every day, which we're feeling our way through. But what a challenge it is, what a privilege it is, not least because nobody can tell you what's going to happen next. It is so unpredictable. Who's going to win the next general election? I have no idea. And anybody who tells you they do, don't believe them.
Well, Chris, thank you very much indeed for engaging so frankly with the feedback listeners' comments. Chris Mason, BBC's political editor. Now, if you'd like to send a comment on anything you've heard on any of the BBC's radio stations, on Sounds or podcasts, please do get in touch. The simplest way to do that is to send a voice note using WhatsApp. The number is 03 333 444 544. And you can ring the same number and leave a voice message. That number again, 03 333 444 544. On X and Instagram, it's at BBC R4 Feedback. And you can also send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk. And please do go to BBC Sounds, where you can search for feedback, click like and subscribe, so then you'll get every episode in your feed and you can listen whenever you like. Well, thank you to everyone who has sent in nominations for the Feedback Interview of the Year. If you aren't a regular listener, let me just take a minute to explain. This is our annual competition where you, the listener, get to choose any interview across any station on BBC Radio or podcast that you consider exceptional. It could be a political leader being expertly grilled, or a particularly moving or thought-provoking conversation. It's also about the skill of the interviewer. So if you've heard something that you think merits a nomination for Interview of the Year, please do get in touch. Well, this week we've got a suggestion for an interview with an asylum seeker who's staying at the Bell Hotel in Epping, which has been the focus of many protests outside. The nomination is from Janet Phillips from Ware in Hertfordshire.
I would like to nominate an interview by Evan Davies with an asylum seeker on the PM programme on Thursday, August the 28th. It was an interview with a young man from Somalia who was staying at the Bell Hotel in Epping. It was really interesting to hear his experiences and to learn just how he had come to the UK.
So you must have had a heck of a journey from Somalia to the UK. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
I came from Turkey, to Greece, to Austria, to France. So it took around, 3 years. That's why I learned even English, In Austria, I stayed a long time.
His English was very good, and he conveyed the difficulties such people experience. It was ironic he had not intended to come to the UK in the first place, but his problems in Greece and Austria were such that he came here.
What brought you to the UK? Why? Because obviously that was another piece of your journey.
Because I first came to Greece, and then, I claimed asylum, and then my asylum was rejected. So I appealed, and then I started working in farms and all of that. But they still came because I don't have papers to work in there, so they arrested me. I even spent around 15 days in a detention center. They gave me notes to get out of this country within 14 days, or they will take me wherever they wanted. So I had to leave Greece.
The interview made very clear what migrants face in terms of the dangers of crossing the channel in small boats and the corruption of the gangs arranging these crossings.
And then once you get on the boat, if you're a man, you have to sit like on the edge, and your legs are spread, and then you have such a painful, and it took about 9-10 hours actually.
I thought Evan handled the interview with patience and empathy. It was good to hear the view of someone caught up in the situation in Epping.
When you go out, can I ask, and as you say, you do go out if you have a reason to go out, but when you go out, how is it? Do you feel like there's a divide between those living in the hotel and the community around the hotel? Do you feel there's a hostility? What do you feel?
You know, when you're just walking around the road, that's most of the time when you feel about the hostility and all that. Because when you go to the city, it's much safer. They know people who care about you. It's easy to. But when it's empty areas and people come across you, they say scumbag, you this, you that, insulting words.
People do say that. You personally have had that experience.
Yeah.
The young man seemed charming, and it would be interesting to hear what happens to him as he navigates the very difficult system.
You'd like to be in the UK permanently now, is that right?
Yeah, I would love to be in the UK, and then I would love to, don't just to be a freeloader, because I do believe also some people do take advantage of the system, and instead of working just because they are offered help, just take advantage of them.
I would be really interested to know how the young man gets on with his application. I actually thought he was really brave to be prepared to be interviewed in the current climate.
Well, thanks to Janet Phillips for that nomination. And if you've heard an interview anywhere on BBC Audio, radio, signs, podcasts that you feel should be considered for the Feedback Interview of the Year, do let us know. Now, there are some things that you just don't mess with on Radio 4. The rules were broken last Sunday on Desert Island Discs. The Rolling Stones' Ronnie Wood picked his book, he chose his song, and then it came to a luxury item. Well, Ronnie got a chest containing all of his art materials, and he had hidden a harmonica in his pocket, and that wasn't all.
Hello, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ronnie. Talk about pushing his luck with that harmonica. We've cast away many musicians.
From Susan Weston Brown. It was an essential listen on Sunday because Ronnie Wood was the castaway. However, Lauren was too lenient with him.
Well, because it's you, Ronnie, I'm going to look the other way, obviously. But, you're pushing against an open door. I shouldn't really.
The programme allows one luxury item. She gave in to him and made excuses so he could take 3.
You can't have a carpet and the art materials. It's got to be one or t'other.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Especially if I'm letting you sneak the harmonica in.
Oh, no, that's in my pocket anyway. You wouldn't even know about that.
But I do know.
You don't count the harmonica and let me have the carpet. Otherwise, I'm not getting washed up.
How about this? I give you the art materials.
Yeah.
On the condition that the carpet is the subject of your first still life.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
Time to change the presenter, in my opinion.
Oh, he's a smooth talker. Ronnie had Lauren wrapped around his little finger. Luxury item inflation on Desert Island Discs. Whatever next? Well, there's nothing next here. That is all for this week. But from me and all the team, thank you very much.